Coming up, an interview with one half of the rock, pop, and soul duo where everything they touched turned to solid gold. He relates the story of a number one hit from the mid-'80s that came at the crossroads of analog and digital. He came up with a song on accident. It's a really fascinating story. Next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you used to listen to Casey Kasem's American Top 40 Countdown every single week, you are going to love this channel. Go ahead and subscribe below right now to get the stories from the artists. And if you can click up here, you can see our brand new merch. We're in it right now. It's a little tribute to the Devo album. We also have a Patreon. You'll want to see our other catalog of content there, and you can become an honorary producer. That helps our mission of curating music history. All that is up top. So it's time for another edition of our series Revelations, where artists and writers take us through a deep dive into the greatest songs and albums, where you get never before shared details. On this episode of Revelations, we are going to go behind two vital singles from the years 1983 and 1984. Daryl Hall and John Oates are the most successful duo of the rock era. I love to say that because they're amazing. They burst onto the scene in the 70s with several pop standards, including She's Gone. She's gone. Sarah Smile. Oh, Sarah, please, Sarah, please. And the number one smash, Rich Girl. They blew up in the 80s with hit after hit after hit, from Kiss on My List, Private Eyes, You Make My Dreams, I Can't Go For That, No Can Do, to Man Eater. Every year they were at the top of the charts. Well, as 1983 rolled around, at that point they had had 11 top 40 hits in the 80s alone, with 8 of those going to the top 10 and 4 going to number 1. Again, that's just counting the 80s. 1983 to 1984, they were busy years for the duo. They started a new era as digital music was starting to come into focus, the way they were recording. In 83, they released a greatest hits album called Rock and Soul Part 1, which I have back there, along with 3 of their biggest hits of the 70s, and it also included most of the top 10 hits from the 80s, along with 2 brand new cuts. I'm sure that you remember the major label's greatest hits con of the 1980s. You know, we'll offer you 10 songs that you already have by repackaging them with, 1 or 2 new songs that you don't own, so you'll have to buy a full album for those new tracks. I didn't mind, because this was before digital music, and to have all of the hits on one LP was just amazing. With Hall & Oates' greatest hits, it really was worth it, because the 2 extra tracks were huge hits. They were amazing songs, including the underappreciated Adult Education, as well as the irresistible number 2 hit Say It Isn't So, which was always one of my favorites from them. In fact, this is what John Oates said about Say It Isn't So. I want to ask you about, then this came out, Rock and Soul, and Say It Isn't So and Adult Education. 2 extra tracks were put on there that were both top 10 hits. But Say It Isn't So, I've always felt like was one of the most underappreciated songs that you guys did. It was a massive hit. I mean, it went to number 2 for 4 weeks. It was behind Say, Say, Say. Any other week, it probably would have been number 1, but that was just a great arrangement. And I understand that that was developed in the studio with backing vocals that were inspired by the Flamingos' I Only Have Eyes for You. Is that true?
Millions of people go by.
Where'd you hear that?
I read that somewhere.
Well, don't believe everything you read.
I think I read it in the number 1 hits, that book by Fred
Sure,
Bronson.
yeah, it was inspired by the Flamingos. Of course it was. I had no idea. Just that Daryl and I have a very unique way of doing background vocals. People have always commented over the years, musicians and songwriters and people that I work with always say, man, I love your background vocals. I love your background vocals. It's just a thing, it's a Philadelphia thing. It's a certain way of singing. A lot of times our background vocals are actually our chorus. That's kind of a unique stylistic thing that we do. You look at Out of Touch or even Man Eater for that matter. Say It Isn't So. I mean, the backgrounds are the hook. So we don't treat backgrounds like we don't bury them back in the mix. We put them way up front, almost like a lead vocal.
Say It Isn't So was it kind of a different production for you guys?
Well, here again, it was the 80s. It was that lean eighth note kind of feel that was very popular in the 80s, one and two and three and four. It's the eighth note thing that was, really a signature musical theme of the 80s.
While the masses were buying Rock and Soul Part 1 and pushing Say It Isn't So up the charts to number 2, should have been number 1, Daryl Hall and John Oates were working on their next album, Big Bam Boom. Big Bam Boom was Hall & Oates' 12th studio album, I believe. It was released in late 1984. I think it was in October of that year, with the lead single being Out of Touch, which would prove to be the duo's last number 1 hit of the decade and ever since. Reaching out for something to hold. Out of Touch also went to number 24 on the Hot Black singles charts, went to number 8 on the AC charts. It also went to number 1 on the dance charts. It was just a crossover beast. It's actually my favorite Daryl Hall and John Oates record, Big Bam Boom, because there's so many great tracks on this LP, including The Method of Modern Love. Actually, my favorite Hall & Oates composition ever, Some Things Are Better Left Unsaid. Feel like I can run away. I tell you, it's an 80s masterpiece. If there ever was one, go check it out. Both of those songs were released as singles. Method of Modern Love went to number 5, and Some Things Are Better Left Unsaid went to number 18. Should have been a bigger hit. Anyway, Daryl Hall and John Oates showed their deep repertoire of musical talent with forays into pop, rock, dance, and soul on this album. Now, it peaked at number 5, the album did, on the Billboard album chart. It sold over 3 million copies. It actually makes it one of their biggest selling LPs ever. I remember I bought this album with my allowance, and I was just blown away by the album cover. I actually pinned it to my wall growing up. I only say this about a few artists, but there are 2 kinds of people in this world. Those who love Hall & Oates and those who are lying through their teeth. Seriously, how could anyone not love this magical twain of musical ecstasy? I mean, for about 10 years, they had the rock and roll, rock and soul Midas touch. Now we'll hear John Oates tell us about crafting Out of Touch and Big Bam Boom. Now, as we go into this portion of the interview, I want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. Zenni absolutely rocks. I wear these things all the time. They're the only glasses, the only brand I'll ever want for at this point. They're comfortable, they're stylish. You can design your own pair at zenni.com. You can do a virtual try-on before you buy. Check it out today. Here is John Oates. Well, Big Bam Boom. This came at a point where I have my own money from allowance and things like that, and this was the first Daryl Hall and John Oates album that I bought with my own money. This is the copy.
Well, I hope you feel it was money well spent.
It was, absolutely. Because back then, you had to be careful. It cost a lot for a record for a young kid. You wanted to make sure that you bought an album that had at least 2 or 3 good songs on it. And this
Yeah,
one,
and I wanted to make sure I got my full 18 cents on each one too.
that's right. So Out of Touch, let's talk about that. Just another amazing song that, like You Make My Dreams, has become this, that it's found a new generation. Like my kids, it's my 11-year-old's favorite. He loves that song. And like You Make My Dreams, it's found new audience through that. What do you remember about that? That was number 1 for 2 weeks and 14th straight top 40 single of the 80s at that point.
Wow. Well, I remember it very well. This was a time when technology was beginning to change. You know, we had been living in the analog world right up to that point. Digital technology was beginning to emerge and beginning to become available. This wasn't digital, but it was still an upgrade for me because I love to make, to do some stuff at home. And prior to this, if you wanted to record, you went in a recording studio. There was no in between, really. But they came out with this little cassette deck that was a 4-track cassette deck. You used a normal, regular cassette, just like type of cassettes that people listened to in those days. But you could overdub, and you could also bounce tracks. So you could do multiple tracks. You could do 8, 16 tracks, 12 tracks, whatever. And I thought this was cool. I could, be able to make some home demos and fool around with things. I had also purchased a synthesizer, a Roland synthesizer, which I'm not much of a keyboard player, but I can dabble. So I was just experimenting. I was experimenting with this new technology, this new cassette deck. I had the synthesizer. And so on the synthesizer, there was a button that said arpeggiator, and I had no idea what an arpeggiator was. And, I like to joke, it was, 3 o'clock in the morning, so I hit the button. And, and it started going. The preset sound that just happened to be logged into the keyboard was a kind of a wood block, a tonal wood blocks. It was a wood block with a tone. And so, it would change tones as you change keys. And so, I hit the key and it went donk, 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 donk. And then I went donk, 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 and I played the melody. It just happened. And I went, wow, that's cool. And so I put a drum beat to it. And then I started coming up with this thing. And I first sang, "You're Out of Touch, I'm Out of Town." And I'm out of my head when you're not around, because town rhymed with around.
Right.
And my wife at the time was traveling. I believe she was in Europe. So it was that's what I was thinking. And so I worked it all out, and I put some harmonies and some big vocals on it, bounced all these tracks, took it into the studio, and we were working. And Arthur Baker was a dance mixer who was co-producing the album with us on certain tracks. And I played it for him because he was producing the stylistics at the time. And I thought, here's a great song for the stylistics, because it was kind of sound like a Philly song. I put the bells, ding, dong, ding, dong, very Gamble and Huff-esque. And he went, "You're crazy." He goes, "That's the #1 record for you and Daryl. You guys got to cut it." And so Daryl came in, I played it for him. He went, "Yeah, man, let's work it up." So we wrote the verse together. Which, by the way, I think the words are really good in the verse. One of our better lyrics. And that leads to the making of that album, where technology began to play a very important part in the recording process, much more than any of the records we had made prior to that.
For sure. Well, and I remember when it was used in Grand Theft Auto Vice City. The Uniting Nations covered it as well. That was a pretty cool cover. And
yeah, I remember that too. My young son was just getting into video games at the time, and he told me about Grand Theft Auto and that it was included in that. It blew my mind. I was like, I had no idea. So, yeah, thank you, Grand Theft Auto. Among other people.
Again, Big Bam Boom, like you said, it was an evolution. It sounded much different than records before, the big production, and Method of Modern Love was like that. It was very different.
we were at the top of our game we were at the top of the pop world. So everyone wanted us to use all their new technology. So there was the Fairlight polyphonic synthesizer. There was the Synclavier. So this was the first time that polyphonic synthesizers became available. Prior to that, most synthesizers were monophonic. You could only do one note at a time. So now we had synthesizers that could, there were digital samples. You could actually record things into the synthesizer, and then you could play it. You could record voices. You could record anything. And so Fairlight and Synclavier both sent us units so that we could use them in the studio, and actually sent guys who could operate them and show us how to use them. So all of a sudden we were moving into really the earliest days of the digital recording era. And although we were still recording on analog tape, we hadn't transitioned to digital tape yet, but we were recording on analog tape, but we were using a lot of digital equipment. And we were sampling drum sounds so it was much more experimental. And I think a lot of, I don't think we get enough credit for the kind of, breaking ground in the kind of the end of the analog era and the beginning of the digital era with that album. But it was very adventurous. We were doing all sorts of things. We were running microphone out the window of the studio into the alley, and that sound on Method of Modern Love, that bonk bonk sound, that's a Boy Scout canteen filled with water. With water in it. And we kept pouring water out until we got the right tone and just hitting it with a stick. And we sampled that, and then we actually played it with the keyboard. So there was all sorts of things like that going on that record. And that record is very adventurous, for sure.
You're out of touch. I'm out of touch. Out of Touch is my son who has autism. It's his favorite song. I mean, he listens to it every single day, I swear. He really appreciates it. Anyway, leave us a comment about this delectable slice of 80s rock, pop, and soul. What are your memories of this song and the music video? I love the music video. What are your memories of Daryl Hall and John Oates and their magical output? Let us know in the comments. If you dig our content, our videos, make sure that you subscribe below so that you never miss out on our content. Check out our merch. Make sure to look at our Patreon for more content. It helps us keep the music alive, very important. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.